Hello everyone, and welcome back to RealFear Files. Today, I'm bringing you a story that is deeply disturbing. We'll dive into 9 chilling true horror accounts from across Tennessee. In this episode, we'll journey through the darkest corners of the volunteer state, uncovering terrifying events that have haunted families and communities for years. From the shadowed streets of Memphis to the isolated mountain towns of East Tennessee, these are not legends or myths. They are real experiences endured by real people. Every story has been carefully researched and confirmed through police reports, witness accounts, and investigative records. To protect the privacy of those involved, some names and identifying details have been altered, but the events themselves remain unchanged. The fear is real. The darkness is undeniable. Tonight, you will hear the truth. If this is your first time here, subscribe to RealFear Files for daily true horror stories that will keep you on edge. And make sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment when terror comes calling. In the spring of 2016, Memphis thrummed with its usual energy. The blues clubs along Beale Street were alive every night with music. Tourists wandered through the historic district, snapping photos, while the Mississippi River flowed past the city, unchanging, as it had for centuries, largely indifferent to the lives unfolding along its banks. For 23-year-old Camila Rodriguez, Memphis was home. She had moved from Nashville 3 years earlier, drawn by a new job downtown and the allure of a fresh start. Camila was known for her bright, infectious laugh and her unwavering devotion to her family. She called her mother every single day without fail. She doted on her younger brother, still in high school, sending him care packages packed with his favorite snacks and handwritten notes of encouragement. Her co-workers remembered her as a beacon in the office, always the first to volunteer for tasks and the last to leave if someone needed help. She had recently begun dating Derek, a local musician who performed at small venues along Beale Street. Friends noticed she seemed genuinely happy and optimistic about her future. But on the evening of April 17, 2016, Camila Rodriguez disappeared. Despite exhaustive searches, countless interviews, and a multi-year investigation, no one has ever uncovered what happened to her. She vanished, as if the city itself had swallowed her whole. The day had begun ordinarily. Camila arrived at work shortly before 8 a.m., carrying her usual iced coffee from the nearby cafe. She attended a team meeting at 10, shared ideas for an upcoming marketing campaign, and spent the afternoon at her desk responding to emails and finalizing a presentation. Her supervisor later told police she seemed completely normal, cheerful, focused, and fully engaged. At 5:30 p.m., she packed up, said her goodbyes, and left the office. Security cameras in the lobby captured her leaving at precisely 5:34 p.m. She wore a light blue blouse, black slacks, and carried a brown leather messenger bag. Her long dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she had her phone in hand. The footage shows her pausing briefly on the sidewalk, checking her phone, and then heading left toward the parking garage where she kept her car. That was the last confirmed sighting of Camila Rodriguez. Her vehicle, a silver 2014 Honda Accord, was found 3 days later in the parking garage, parked in her assigned spot on the 3rd level. The doors were locked, nothing appeared disturbed, and her gym bag remained in the back seat. But Camila herself was nowhere to be found. When she failed to show up for work the following day, her supervisor called repeatedly, reaching only voicemail. Concern grew rapidly. Camila was never late, let alone absent without notice. Her mother, Elena Rodriguez, became frantic when her daily check-in call went unanswered. She knew something was terribly wrong. Camila would never go an entire day without contacting family. By that evening, Elena drove from Nashville to Memphis and filed a missing persons report with the Memphis Police Department. The investigation began immediately. Detectives reviewed security footage from the office, the parking garage, and nearby businesses. They interviewed co-workers, friends, and family, and examined Camilla's phone records. Her last outgoing message had been sent at 5:41 p.m., just minutes after leaving work. It was to Derek, her boyfriend, and read simply, "Leaving now. See you at 8." Derek confirmed their plans to meet for dinner that evening at a restaurant on South Main Street. He waited for over an hour, trying to call her when she didn't arrive. At first, he assumed she had been delayed by work or had changed her mind. It wasn't until the next day, when she didn't appear at the office, that he realized something was seriously wrong. Investigators questioned Derek extensively, examining his relationship with Camilla, his actions that evening, and his response to her disappearance. He provided a verifiable alibi. He had been at the restaurant the entire evening, confirmed by multiple witnesses, including the staff and other diners. Security footage from the restaurant supported his account. He arrived at 7:45 p.m. and left alone shortly after 9. While the police continued to monitor him, there was no evidence he was involved in her disappearance. As days turned into weeks, the search widened. Teams scoured parks, wooded areas, and the banks of the Mississippi River. Divers combed the murky waters, and cadaver dogs were brought to sniff for traces of human remains. Volunteers plastered her image on flyers across Memphis, telephone poles, storefronts, and bulletin boards. Her family held press conferences, pleading for information, and the story dominated local news coverage. One of the most baffling aspects of Camilla's disappearance was the complete absence of a digital trail. After that final message to Derek at 5:41 p.m., her phone went silent. It either died or had been turned off and never pinged another cell tower. Bank records showed no unusual transactions, credit cards were untouched, and social media accounts were inactive. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Detectives explored every theory. Had she been abducted? Memphis, like many cities, had its share of violent crime. Beale Street, despite its vibrant nightlife, was not without danger. Was she a random target, or had someone been watching her? Some friends recalled that in the weeks prior, Camilla had mentioned feeling like someone was following her, though she dismissed it as stress-related paranoia. Those comments now seemed ominous. Another possibility was that Camilla had chosen to leave voluntarily, escaping from an unknown danger. But those who knew her couldn't imagine this. She loved her family, her job, and had no history of mental illness, financial troubles, or secret life. She would not abandon everything without leaving a trace. And even if she had wanted to disappear, how could she have done so without using money, driving her car, or turning on her phone? The disappearance defied logic. 6 months later, a potential breakthrough emerged. A man who worked as a janitor in a nearby building came forward, claiming he had seen a woman matching Camilla's description around 6 p.m. on the night she vanished. He recalled she seemed anxious, frequently glancing over her shoulder as if being followed. He considered approaching her, but she turned a corner before he could. When shown a photo, he positively identified her. Detectives canvassed the area, but there was no additional surveillance or corroborating witnesses. The man seemed credible, yet without further evidence, the sighting couldn't be confirmed. Still, it raised troubling questions. If Camilla left the parking garage on foot rather than in her car, where was she going? And why did she appear terrified? As the investigation dragged on, leads grew cold. Tips poured in from across the country, including Nashville, Atlanta, New Orleans, and even California. Each claim was investigated and dismissed. None led to Camilla. Her family never stopped searching. Elena Rodriguez posted online, appeared on true crime podcasts, and worked with organizations dedicated to finding missing persons. She hired a private investigator to retrace the official investigation, hoping for any clue that might have been overlooked. Years passed. Camilla's case became one of the many unsolved mysteries. Her family held annual vigils, keeping her memory alive. But media coverage faded, and public attention moved on. For Elena, there was no moving on. She still called her daughter's phone daily, listening to the voicemail, clinging to hope. In 2021, 5 years after her disappearance, a true crime documentary featured Camilla's story, bringing renewed attention. Tips flooded in, and investigators reopened the case with modern technology, enhanced digital forensics, DNA analysis, and improved surveillance review. Yet no definitive answers emerged. One particularly chilling tip came from an anonymous caller, who claimed knowledge of a human trafficking operation in Memphis around the time Camilla disappeared. The caller alleged that young women were being abducted and moved out of state. Federal agencies investigated, but no concrete link to Camilla's case was found. Today, Camilla Rodriguez remains missing. Her family continues their relentless search, refusing to accept they may never know the truth. Detectives still follow every lead, no matter how small, and the case remains open as an endangered missing person file. Privately, however, many fear the worst. Memphis, despite its rich culture and thriving music scene, harbors shadows where people can vanish. Sometimes they are found, sometimes they are not. Camilla Rodriguez walked out of her office one spring evening in 2016. And somewhere between that lobby and her car, she disappeared into the unknown. Her story is a haunting reminder that danger can lurk closer than we realize, that familiar streets can hide unimaginable horrors, and that some mysteries may never be solved. For those who love her, the uncertainty is a wound that never heals. For the rest of us, her disappearance is a stark warning. Remain vigilant. Trust your instincts, and never take your safety for granted. In a city like Memphis, in a world like ours, anyone can vanish, and sometimes they never return. Nashville. In the summer of 2003, the city was everything one would imagine from the heart of Music City. The honky-tonks lining Broadway overflowed nightly with tourists and locals alike. The warm, humid air carried the thrum of live music spilling onto the sidewalks. For 27-year-old Gabriel Matthews, Nashville was more than a city. It was the place where he had crafted his dreams. He was a session guitarist, talented and in demand, having played on recordings for numerous rising country artists. Gabriel had earned a reputation in the music industry for a rare mix of technical skill and raw emotion, the kind that made producers want to work with him repeatedly. Gabriel lived in a modest apartment in East Nashville, a neighborhood in the early stages of gentrification. Back then, it was a patchwork of working-class families, artists, and people just trying to get by. He didn't mind the rough edges. The rent was affordable, and the studios where he spent most of his days were close by. Neighbors described him as quiet but kind, the type of man who would help move a couch or lend a few dollars if someone needed it. Most evenings he kept to himself, practicing guitar late into the night, the notes drifting through the thin walls of the building. But beneath that calm exterior, Gabriel carried a secret, a darkness he shared with very few. He was involved with Vanessa Clark, a woman whose presence in his life was both magnetic and destructive. Their relationship was turbulent, filled with passion and danger. Vanessa, 24, worked as a bartender at a gritty Lower Broadway dive bar. She had a striking appearance, with jet black hair and eyes that seemed to pierce right through a person. Gabriel and Vanessa had been on and off for 2 years, a cycle of explosive arguments, intense reconciliations, and manipulation neither could break. Friends warned Gabriel to stay away from her. They described Vanessa as trouble, someone who brought out the worst in him. But Gabriel couldn't let go. There was a toxic chemistry between them, an invisible force that pulled him back again and again, no matter how many times he tried to break free. Vanessa's past was shadowed by violence. She had been arrested twice for assault, including an incident where she allegedly stabbed an ex-boyfriend during a confrontation. Though the charges had been dismissed, records documented the events. Gabriel knew about this history, and perhaps it should have been enough to make him leave. But it wasn't. On the night of July 19, 2003, Gabriel and Vanessa had a heated argument at her apartment. Neighbors later told police that they had heard shouting, the crash of breaking glass, and then a single gunshot. When officers arrived shortly after midnight, they found Gabriel Matthews collapsed on the kitchen floor, a pool of blood surrounding him. He had been shot once in the chest at close range. The bullet had pierced his heart, and he had died within minutes. Vanessa sat nearby, her hands smeared with blood, her expression blank and unreadable. She told responding officers that the shooting had been an act of self-defense. She claimed that during the argument, Gabriel had attacked her, grabbed her by the throat, and slammed her against the wall. She said she had been terrified for her life and had grabbed a gun from a kitchen drawer, firing instinctively in a desperate attempt to survive. Officers noted bruising on her neck and arms, consistent with her story. Yet the crime scene left detectives uneasy. The 9mm handgun was found on the counter, wiped clean of all fingerprints except Vanessa's, a detail that raised suspicions. If the shooting had been impulsive, why wipe the weapon afterward? Gabriel's body suggested he had been shot while moving backward, not lunging forward. The bullet's trajectory indicated it came from slightly above, implying Vanessa had been standing over him. Blood spatter analysis confirmed he had been on the floor when the shot was fired, contradicting her claim that he had attacked her while standing. Detectives spent hours questioning Vanessa. She maintained her account, but inconsistencies emerged. She claimed she remembered little of what followed the shooting, describing a blur of fear and adrenaline. Under pressure, she admitted that the argument had been over another man, someone she had been seeing behind Gabriel's back. Gabriel had discovered the affair and confronted her, escalating the dispute. Vanessa insisted her actions were still self-defense, claiming Gabriel's behavior had forced her to protect herself. Friends and family painted a starkly different picture. Gabriel was not a violent man. He had never raised a hand to anyone. Though he could be possessive or jealous regarding Vanessa, he was not prone to physical aggression. Those who knew him believed Vanessa had manipulated the situation, provoking Gabriel during the argument and shooting him deliberately when he didn't respond as she wanted. They pointed to her violent history, her pattern of explosive behavior, and her lack of remorse immediately following the shooting. The district attorney's office faced a difficult choice. Evidence suggested both possibilities. Bruising on Vanessa's body, the fact that she had called 911 herself, and her consistent fear for her safety supported her claim of self-defense. Yet the forensic evidence, blood patterns, the gun's condition, and the trajectory of the shot suggested a darker reality. Gabriel might have been executed rather than killed in a moment of panic. The trial began in the spring of 2004, turning Nashville into a media frenzy. The prosecution painted Vanessa Clark as a manipulative, dangerous woman who had killed Gabriel Matthews in a fit of rage. They presented forensic analysis, blood spatter evidence, the gun's trajectory, and the wiped weapon. Gabriel's friends and family testified, illustrating the gentle nature of a man trapped in a toxic relationship with a volatile woman. The defense leaned on Vanessa's testimony. She described years of emotional abuse by Gabriel, his controlling ways, jealousy, and threats. She presented photographs of bruises and medical records from earlier incidents, claiming Gabriel had harmed her, but that fear had prevented her from reporting it. Vanessa portrayed herself as a woman pushed to her breaking point, forced to act in order to survive. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury could not reach a unanimous decision. The trial ended in a mistrial. A second trial was attempted, but it too resulted in a hung jury. Vanessa Clark walked free. Charges were eventually dropped, and no one was held accountable for Gabriel's death. The case left Nashville divided. Some viewed Vanessa as a victim defending herself. Others believed she had committed cold-blooded murder and escaped justice. Gabriel's family was devastated. His mother, Linda Matthews, a gentle and determined woman, became an advocate for victims of domestic abuse, though she believed her son had been the true victim. She spoke publicly, shared interviews, attended community events, and worked tirelessly to honor Gabriel's memory. Not just as a headline, but as a person. He was her son, a gifted musician, a kind soul, tragically caught in a deadly relationship. Vanessa disappeared from Nashville after the second trial. Some claim she moved to California, others said Texas. No one knew for sure. She changed her name, severed ties with her past, and vanished completely. Meanwhile, Gabriel's loved ones were left with unresolved grief, unanswered questions, and the painful reality that justice had not been served. In the years following Gabriel's death, there were attempts to revisit the case. Advances in forensic science, technology, and understanding of abusive dynamics prompted reconsideration, but nothing resulted. The case remains officially classified as justifiable homicide, though many believe the truth was far darker. Gabriel Matthews is buried in a small cemetery on Nashville's outskirts. His headstone reads simply, "Beloved son, talented musician gone too soon." Each week his mother visits, bringing fresh flowers and sitting beside his grave for hours, speaking to him as though he could still hear her. She tells him about new songs she has discovered, musicians who remember him, and the injustice that robbed him of the life he deserved. Nashville moves on. The music scene thrives, and new stories emerge. Yet Gabriel's story remains vivid for those who knew him. The night he died, the unresolved questions, and the persistent sense that the truth has yet to surface. The story of Gabriel Matthews is a haunting reminder that darkness can exist even in the brightest places. Violence can hide behind beauty and charm, and the justice system does not always protect those in need. For some, Vanessa Clark escaped justice. For others, she was a woman defending herself. The case exemplifies the gray areas of real life and the complications inherent in human relationships. Regardless of perspective, one fact is certain. Gabriel Matthews was killed violently in an East Nashville apartment, leaving a wound in his community that has never healed. His story warns of the dangers of toxic relationships, the consequences of love gone wrong, and the reality that sometimes the real monsters are the people we invite into our lives. By the time we recognize the threat, it can be too late. Gabriel's music lives on. His recordings circulate among collectors and enthusiasts who appreciate the raw talent he brought to every session. There is a bittersweet beauty in listening to his guitar, knowing the hands that played those notes are gone, and the man behind the music was taken far too soon. For those who remember him, Gabriel Matthews is more than a victim. He is a person, a son, a friend, a musician whose life had meaning. His story deserves to be told, to honor his memory, acknowledge his humanity, and remind us that every life lost to violence is a tragedy that should never be forgotten. The hills surrounding Knox County, Tennessee stretch endlessly, cloaked in dense forests and threaded with narrow roads that wind past small towns and secluded homesteads. It is a strikingly beautiful region, the kind of place where neighbors still know one another, and families have called the land home for generations. Yet beneath the canopy of trees, secrets can linger, hidden by time and isolation. In the autumn of 1989, one such secret emerged from these hills, a secret that would haunt the local community for decades. Riley Jennings was just 17 years old when she vanished. She lived with her parents and younger brother in a modest home on the outskirts of Knoxville, near the town of Fountain City. Riley was a senior at Central High School, a well-liked student with a promising future. She cheered on the school squad, kept strong grades, and had been accepted to the University of Tennessee for the upcoming fall. Her friends described Riley as vibrant and full of life, always laughing, always at the center of a crowd. She had golden hair often tied in a high ponytail, sparkling blue eyes, and a presence that seemed to illuminate every room she entered. But behind the bright smiles, Riley's life was complicated. Her parents, David and Susan Jennings, were embroiled in a bitter divorce. Their household was tense, a mixture of arguments and long, strained silences. Riley often sought refuge at friends' homes to escape the conflict at home. She had begun seeing a young man named Travis McCann, 19, who had left high school and worked at a local garage. David Jennings disapproved of the relationship, believing Travis was a bad influence and a distraction from Riley's potential. Disagreements about Travis had led to heated exchanges between father and daughter, and Riley had occasionally threatened to move in with Travis if her father did not relent. On the evening of October 14, 1989, Riley told her mother she was going to a friend's house to study. She left home around 6 p.m., dressed in jeans, a purple sweater, and her cheerleading jacket. Her backpack, filled with textbooks and notebooks, was slung over her shoulder, and she promised she would return by 10 p.m. Susan Jennings watched her daughter walk to a car waiting at the curb, assuming it belonged to one of Riley's friends. At the time, she thought little of it. Riley never returned. When 10 p.m. passed with no sign of her, Susan began calling Riley's friends, but none had seen her that evening. She then called Travis, who claimed he had not heard from Riley all day. By midnight, panic set in. Susan dialed the Knox County Sheriff's Office to report Riley missing. Deputies who responded initially suggested that Riley might have just spent the night elsewhere, a common occurrence for teenagers, and told Susan to check back in the morning if she hadn't returned. Morning came, and Riley was still gone. Susan called again, this time demanding that a search be conducted. Friends, neighbors, and volunteers combed the surrounding area, calling her name and scanning the woods for any trace. Flyers bearing her smiling face were posted across Knoxville. Local news outlets covered her disappearance extensively, broadcasting her story to the public. Authorities quickly focused on Travis McCann, the boyfriend and obvious person of interest. He was questioned multiple times, asked to take a polygraph, and subjected to searches of his apartment and vehicle. Travis consistently maintained his innocence, explaining that he had been at work the night Riley vanished. His employer confirmed his alibi. Though there was no direct evidence linking him to her disappearance, suspicion nonetheless shadowed him. Weeks turned into months with no new leads, and Riley Jennings remained missing. Then, in the spring of 1990, a hunter stumbled upon a grim discovery about 15 miles from the Jennings home. He had been tracking a deer through dense underbrush when he noticed a shallow grave partially exposed by erosion. Within it lay human remains, badly decomposed and scattered by wildlife. The Knox County Sheriff's Office was called, and forensic teams carefully excavated the site. Dental records confirmed the worst fears. The remains were those of Riley Jennings. The discovery only deepened the mystery. Due to the advanced decomposition, investigators could not determine the exact cause of death. There were no obvious injuries to the bones, no bullet holes or stab marks. It was possible she had been strangled or suffocated, but the evidence could not confirm this. The grave's remote location, accessible only by a little-known dirt road, suggested that whoever buried Riley had intimate knowledge of the area and its seclusion. Detectives reopened the case with renewed urgency. They re-interviewed anyone close to Riley. Her father, David Jennings, whose relationship with her had been strained, came under scrutiny. Travis McCann was questioned again, despite his previously verified alibi. Friends, teachers, and others at Central High School were all revisited. But no one had any leads. No one saw anything. And no one could identify a suspect. One promising lead involved a vehicle reportedly spotted near the grave in the weeks following Riley's disappearance. Multiple witnesses had seen a dark blue sedan with out-of-state plates parked along the remote road at night. One witness recalled seeing two men near the car, though they could not provide detailed descriptions. The vehicle was never identified, and the men were never found. Another theory suggested Riley may have become involved in something dangerous, something unknown to her family and friends. Rumors circulated about possible drug use or associations with unsavory people, including whispers implicating Travis McCann in illegal activities. Yet none of these claims were substantiated. Investigators found no evidence that Riley had used drugs, and Travis denied any involvement in illegal dealings. As the years passed, the case grew cold. The Knox County Sheriff's Office kept the file active, but without new evidence, little progress was possible. Susan Jennings never stopped searching. She became a tireless advocate for families of missing persons, collaborating with organizations dedicated to cold cases. She appeared in interviews, on local news, and in public forums, determined to keep Riley's story alive. Susan believed someone knew what had happened and resolved to find that person. David Jennings, grappling with grief and guilt, took a different path. He blamed himself for the disputes with Riley, for not being closer, for failing to protect her. He withdrew from public life, avoided family gatherings, and eventually moved away from Tennessee. His marriage to Susan, already fractured, collapsed entirely. By 1992 they were divorced, and David vanished from Riley's story, leaving Susan to bear the burden alone. In the early 2000s, advances in forensic science brought new hope. DNA testing, now widely available, offered a potential breakthrough. The sheriff's office revisited the evidence recovered from Riley's grave, searching for anything previously overlooked. Yet the remains' deterioration, compounded by the passage of decades, had destroyed most evidence. No DNA could be extracted, no fingerprints recovered. The case remained unresolved. In 2015, a true crime podcast revisited Riley's disappearance, reaching a national audience. Hundreds of tips poured in, most proving to be dead ends. One stood out. A woman, calling anonymously, said she had been a student at Central High in 1989. She claimed that on the night Riley vanished, she had seen her enter a car with an older man, someone unfamiliar. The woman had feared speaking up at the time, unsure anyone would believe her. She described the man as being in his 30s or 40s, with dark hair and a mustache, and the car as a dark blue sedan, possibly a Chevrolet. Investigators followed the lead, but verification after so many years was nearly impossible. The caller could not recall further details, and no one could identify the man. Still, the tip reignited interest in the case. Detectives began examining men in the area who fit the description, who had owned dark blue sedans in 1989, or who might have been connected to Riley. Once again, the trail went cold. Today, Riley Jennings's case remains open and unsolved. Her grave, once discovered in the hills of Knox County, has long since been filled in, unmarked, and forgotten by most. Her mother, Susan, still resides in Tennessee, waiting for the call that could bring closure. Now in her 70s and facing declining health, her determination endures. She holds on to the belief that someone knows what happened. Someone is carrying the secret, and one day the truth will surface. Riley Jennings was just 17 when her life was taken. College dreams, a future career, and the chance to build a family. All were stolen in an act of violence that remains unexplained. Her story is a stark reminder of life's fragility and how quickly it can be stolen. It is also a testament to a mother's enduring love, to the refusal to let a child fade from memory, and to the hope that justice, however delayed, remains possible. For the people of Knox County, Riley's disappearance serves as a painful lesson. Evil exists, it can strike anywhere, and it sometimes escapes punishment. It is also a call to action, a plea to anyone with knowledge, no matter how minor it may seem, to come forward. Because somewhere out there, someone knows what happened to Riley Jennings. Until they speak, the truth remains buried, and Riley remains frozen in time. A smiling 17-year-old whose life was cut tragically short, leaving behind a mystery that continues to haunt a community. The Great Smoky Mountains are ancient beyond memory. Stretching along the line where Tennessee meets North Carolina, their ridges often wrapped in a veil of pale mist that drifts upward from the hollows, like the land itself is breathing. Long before settlers arrived, the Cherokee called these mountains home and believed they were sacred, a place where the seen and unseen worlds brushed against each other. They told of beings who walked the forests in borrowed human shapes, of voices that slipped through the darkness, calling to travelers who dared to linger too long. To most people today, those tales are little more than bits of old folklore, charming but outdated. Yet there are some who know differently. People who have come face to face with things that don't fit neatly into science or reason. Caleb Morrison became one of them. In the fall of 2012, Caleb was 31, a wildlife biologist employed by the National Park Service. His work revolved around tracking populations of animals in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Bears, elk, smaller mammals. Anything that helped paint a picture of the ecosystem's health. It meant long days hiking into remote corners of the mountains, and nights spent alone under canvas, miles from the nearest human being. Caleb thrived in it. He preferred the quiet, the solitude, the honest rhythm of the wilderness. Late October sent him into one of the most isolated sectors near Cades Cove. The valley was breathtaking, a wide meadow framed by towering peaks, dotted with old cabins, barns, and churches from the earliest settlers. But the beauty wasn't its only reputation. Rangers traded stories, quiet ones, usually after hours, about strange happenings there. Visitors claimed they heard their own names whispered from nowhere. Campers described an oppressive feeling of being watched. Some said they saw shapes moving between the trees, too tall or too silent to be animals. Others swore the woods felt hostile after sundown, as if the land itself rejected trespassers. Caleb knew those stories well. Every wild place had its tales, and he had never paid them much mind. He was trained to measure, to document, to rely on evidence. Myths were interesting but irrelevant. His opinion shifted over the next few days. Caleb set up a small camp beside a narrow creek 2 miles from the nearest marked trail. It was ideal, secluded, safe, and close to the areas he needed to survey. The first 2 days unfolded with predictable routine. He hiked out each morning, set up trail cameras, logged tracks and scat, and returned at dusk. Evenings were spent by a fire, writing notes and listening to the nocturnal chorus. The forest was calm, alive with its usual whispers. Everything changed on his third night. He was stirring a pot of rice and beans over the fire when a sound drifted through the darkness. A voice, soft but unmistakable, calling his name. Caleb. He froze. It had come from beyond the ring of firelight, faint, almost swallowed by the woods. He rose, scanned the shadows, then called out, thinking perhaps a ranger had hiked out to check on him. No reply. He eventually convinced himself it was an auditory trick. Wind, distance, imagination, and returned to his dinner. An hour later, the voice returned, this time much closer. Caleb. A woman's voice, urgent, strained, almost pleading. His pulse spiked. He grabbed his flashlight and swept it across the darkened trees, but nothing moved, nothing breathed. He called out again, louder, demanding an answer. Only silence answered him. He barely slept that night. Every rustle outside the thin nylon walls of his tent set his nerves on edge. He listened for that voice until dawn, exhausted by morning but unwilling to abandon his assignment. He chastised himself for letting superstition creep in. There had to be a rational explanation. On the fourth night, rationality slipped further from reach. Caleb had just finished placing a new camera deep in the woods when he heard footsteps behind him. Human footsteps. Steady, deliberate, pushing through dry leaves. He turned sharply, one hand drifting toward the knife sheathed at his hip. Nothing stood there. The footsteps stopped abruptly, swallowed by the silence. Then came laughter. Soft, low, with an edge of mocking amusement. It drifted from his left, threading through the trees. A cold shudder rippled down his spine. He bolted. He didn't think about his equipment, didn't care how far he was from camp. He ran headlong through the brush, heart pounding, the flashlight beam jolting wildly with each step. Even when he reached camp, terror lingered. He fed the fire constantly through the night, determined to keep the darkness at bay. He knew now, whatever was out there was no person, no hiker, no ranger. Something else moved in those woods. By dawn, he had made up his mind. He radioed his supervisor and requested an early pickup, claiming he wasn't feeling well. No further explanation. Permission was granted. He started breaking down camp as fast as he could, shoving gear into his pack with trembling hands. That's when he saw it. Sitting neatly on a rock beside his tent was the trail camera he had placed deep in the forest the night before. At least a mile away. Untouched, unbroken, just waiting for him. He picked it up with shaking fingers and checked the memory card. The final image was a photo of him, shot from behind, as he walked away from the camera placement site. The timestamp indicated the picture was taken mere minutes before he heard those footsteps. Caleb left the mountains that day and didn't return for 3 months. When he finally did, he refused to go alone, partnering with another biologist who agreed to accompany him on all deep woods assignments. He never described the full truth of what happened. Not to coworkers, not to family. He feared they would question his sanity. But he knew what he had heard, what he had felt, what he had seen. Years later, after leaving the Park Service and settling in another state, Caleb finally shared the story anonymously on an online forum dedicated to unexplained encounters. He wrote about the voices, the steps, the laughter, the trail camera that had been moved without a trace. The responses stunned him. People described nearly identical experiences. Hikers, campers, even former rangers. Voices calling their names. Eyes watching from unseen places. Gear moved or altered with no explanation. They all echoed the same unsettling truth. Something in the Smokies defies reason. One reply stayed with him. It came from an elderly man who identified himself as part of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. The man explained that the exact region where Caleb had camped was regarded by his people as a threshold, a place where the boundary between the living world and the spirit realm thins. He said the voices Caleb heard were likely not human at all, but entities inhabiting that liminal space, drawn to the presence of the living. Not malicious, he said, but not benign either. Unpredictable, curious, fond of confusion, enjoying fear like a kind of game. His words struck a chord within Caleb. They didn't provide answers, but they gave context, a structure for the inexplicable. Curiosity turned into research. Caleb dove into Cherokee legends and recognized fragments of his own experience in the old stories. The Nunehi, the spirit people who lived within the mountains and sometimes walked among humans. The Raven Mocker, a darker entity said to prey on human vitality. Tales of sacred places where mortals were not meant to wander. He avoided that part of the Smokies from then on. He continued his work in biology, but only accepted assignments in areas free from ghost stories and whispered warnings. He accepted finally that not everything on this earth can be measured or charted. Some things are older than science. Some things ignore the rules we cling to. For visitors to the Great Smoky Mountains, Caleb offered simple counsel. Stay on the trails. Don't hike alone after dark. And if a voice calls your name from the shadows, do not respond, because whatever answers back in those old forests isn't looking for friendship. It's looking for something deeper, something instinctive and dangerous. And once it draws your attention, it may never release it. Caleb Morrison's encounter stands as a quiet reminder that the wilderness is not as subdued as we imagine. There are still places where the old stories breathe, where the line between what we know and what awaits in the darkness is thin enough to step across by accident. The Smoky Mountains are one of those places. And for those who have felt that presence there, the mountains become something different. Still beautiful, but shadowed by an unsettling awareness. A place where wonder and dread entwine. A place where the unknown stands just beyond the tree line. Watching, listening, waiting. Chattanooga lies tucked inside a broad valley, its edges surrounded by mountains that rise like silent sentinels. At the city's heart, the Tennessee River winds its way forward, gleaming like a long, shifting ribbon of silver. The city is a tapestry of bridges, cliffs, and overlooks, places where people stand to admire sweeping views stretching far into the distance. But in winter, the scenery transforms. Dense river fog rolls in without warning, curling through the streets and swallowing familiar landmarks. The air turns still, muffled, dreamlike, leaving even lifelong residents feeling as though they are walking through someone else's city. It was during one of these heavy, disorienting winter nights in January 2018 that 20-year-old Lily Harrison disappeared. The date would mark the beginning of a mystery that still haunts Chattanooga. Lily was a junior at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, majoring in psychology. She had plans, big plans, to become a therapist, to help people through their grief and confusion. Her friends described her as a bright soul, someone who offered compassion freely, who listened with genuine empathy. She was the friend who remembered birthdays, who checked in when someone seemed off, who always seemed to know the right words to say. She shared an apartment near campus with two close roommates. They often said Lily was the most reliable person they knew, steady, thoughtful, predictable in the best possible way. She wasn't reckless. She didn't keep secrets. She followed patterns and routines that rarely changed. On the night of January 12th, everything seemed normal. Lily finished her shift at the campus library as she always did. Security footage shows her walking out of the main entrance at 9:15 p.m., bundled in a navy coat and gray scarf, her backpack slung casually over one shoulder. She paused for a moment, smiled, and lifted her hand in a polite wave to the security guard. That gesture, captured in grainy video, would become the final, verified image of her alive. Her walk home was short, less than a mile, and it was a path she took nearly every day. The streets were well lit, and she always felt safe in that part of town. There was nothing to suggest this night would be any different, but Lily never made it home. When 11 p.m. came and went with no sign of her, her roommates exchanged worried glances. Lily wasn't the type to disappear silently. If she were delayed, she always sent a quick text. They tried calling her. Once, twice, then repeatedly. Every call went straight to voicemail. That was the moment fear began to take hold. By midnight, panic had fully set in. They called campus security first, then the Chattanooga Police Department. Officers responded quickly and began tracing Lily's usual walking route, stopping to question anyone out that late. But the fog that night was unusually thick, swallowing entire blocks in a misty blur. Visibility was so low that officers could barely see half a street ahead. If anything had happened to Lily, the fog would have hidden it well. Later, several people recalled how unsettling the city had felt that night. Even regular sounds were distorted. A man walking his dog near the Riverside Trail said he faintly heard what sounded like a woman calling for help. But the fog warped the direction of the sound, making it impossible to pinpoint. The moment lingered in his mind for only a few seconds before fading. He didn't report it until he learned Lily was missing. 3 days after she vanished, a jogger found a phone lying near the entrance to the Walnut Street Bridge, the iconic pedestrian span over the Tennessee River. It was Lily's. The phone was dead, its battery drained, but investigators recovered it and examined every detail they could. Her last text was a simple message to a roommate at 8:45 p.m. "I'll be home soon." There were no outgoing calls afterward. No unusual messages. No indication she had met anyone or that she felt threatened. GPS data showed the phone's movement from the library toward the general direction of the bridge. Then, abruptly, the signal ceased. No gradual drift, no glitch, just an immediate stop, as though the device had been either destroyed, shut off deliberately, or suddenly prevented from transmitting. That discovery made everything more complicated. The bridge was not part of Lily's normal route home. It was out of her way. Why would she have gone there on a cold, fog-blanketed night? Police began digging deeper. They interviewed everyone they could think of, her closest friends, classmates, co-workers at the library, her professors, even casual acquaintances. They combed through her messages and online accounts. They found no signs of trouble, no secret relationship, no hidden stress, no conflict with anyone. By all accounts, Lily's life was stable, her future bright. Search parties expanded outward from the bridge. Flyers went up across the city, in coffee shops, grocery stores, bus stops. Her face on every wall. Volunteers from the community combed riverbanks and hiking trails. Divers searched the Tennessee River, dragging its cold waters again and again. Lily's parents drove in from Knoxville as soon as they got the call. Her mother, Claire, was unable to speak in the interviews, barely able to hold herself together. Her father, Robert, tried to be the steady one, though his voice quivered every time he said his daughter's name. They stayed in Chattanooga for weeks, refusing to leave until they had some kind of answer. But the answers never came. As winter turned to spring, the case grew more stagnant. Leads evaporated as quickly as they surfaced. The internet picked up Lily's story, and true crime forums began dissecting every detail. Theories varied. Some insisted she had been abducted, taken by someone who had been watching her carefully, waiting for a moment when the fog could hide everything. Others thought she might have gone to meet someone she knew, someone she trusted, and that something went wrong. There were even murmurings that her disappearance could be linked to a series of unsettling encounters, reported by other women near the university. Several female students had independently reported seeing a strange man lingering near campus in the weeks leading up to Lily's disappearance. He was described as being in his 30s or 40s, with dark hair and a rough, unshaven appearance. He never spoke. He was simply present, watching. One woman swore she saw him standing across from her apartment late one evening, staring directly at her window. When she looked again, he was gone. Another said he sat in a parked car near the library entrance, eyes fixed on the doorway. Police investigated these sightings, but without a name, license plate, or clear description, they hit a dead end almost immediately. Then came spring of 2018, when a new voice entered the case. A homeless man named Gary Whitaker walked into the police station with information he had been holding on to for months. He said that on the night Lily vanished, he had been sleeping under the Walnut Street Bridge to escape the cold. Sometime late that night, he heard raised voices cutting through the fog, a man and a woman arguing intensely. He thought the woman sounded frightened. He remembered hearing her say something like, "Leave me alone," followed by a single, sharp scream that stopped abruptly. He admitted he was too afraid to look. He stayed still until the voices faded and the fog pressed in again. When he eventually gathered the courage to peek out, he saw nothing but thick, swirling mist. He hadn't reported it earlier because he feared nobody would believe a homeless drifter. Officers didn't dismiss him. They returned to the bridge area with renewed urgency, searching for any trace, footprints, discarded items, blood, anything. But the river had risen and fallen since then, and the weather had erased whatever clues may have existed. They found nothing that supported or disproved Gary's account. Some investigators believed he truly heard something that night. Others wondered if he might have misremembered, influenced by the intense media attention on Lily's case. As January approached again, Lily's family decided to hold a candlelight vigil on the Walnut Street Bridge. The turnout was enormous. Friends, classmates, professors, and complete strangers lined the wooden planks of the bridge, their candles flickering in the winter air. People shared stories, small memories, personal anecdotes, moments that showed who Lily was beyond the headlines. When Lily's father stepped forward to speak, the entire crowd fell silent. He looked out over the dark water, and talked to his daughter as though she could hear him. "Lily, if you're out there, we're still looking. We won't give up. And to the person who took her away, know that we will not stop until we find the truth." But the truth remained hidden. 2 years passed. The police file hadn't closed, but the case had undeniably grown cold. Tips arrived every so often, but none amounted to anything. Lily's parents hired private investigators and used much of their savings searching for leads that never panned out. There were alleged sightings. Someone thought they spotted a woman resembling Lily in Atlanta, another in Memphis, another in St. Louis. Every time her family's hopes rose. Every time the sightings were proven false. Life at the university changed. More security officers patrolled at night. The school installed new lighting along common paths. Students encouraged one another to walk in pairs. But these changes felt like too little, too late, especially to the people who had known Lily. They couldn't erase the sense that someone had slipped through the fog and stolen her away. Lily had done everything right. She stayed in safe, well-lit areas. She kept in touch with her friends. She followed her routine. And still, fate, or someone with dark intentions, found her. What haunts those who loved her most is not knowing. Not knowing whether she was hurt. Not knowing whether she is alive somewhere, unable to reach out. Not knowing whether the person responsible is still walking free. If Lily is somehow alive, her family hopes she can feel their determination, their love, their refusal to let her memory fade. If she is gone, they hope the person who ended her life understands that justice is not something they will quietly accept losing. Because Lily mattered, her life touched countless others, and her disappearance carved a wound into Chattanooga that has never healed. The fog that swallowed her that night lifted with the dawn, but the truth never surfaced with it. And somewhere, hidden in the quiet corners of the city, the answer to what happened to Lily Harrison still waits to be uncovered. Interstate 40 slices across Tennessee like a long, unhealed wound, stretching from Memphis through Nashville and onward to Knoxville. It's a constant stream of headlights and diesel fumes, a road that never truly sleeps. Day and night, trucks thunder along its length, families cruise toward vacations, and commuters hurry between cities. But beneath the ordinary rush of travel, there is a darker reality. Highways create opportunity, not just for commerce and movement, but for predators who thrive in the blur of anonymity. People can vanish here. Violence can strike and dissolve into the traffic before anyone notices. In the summer of 2011, a string of killings along this stretch of asphalt stunned the entire state and exposed just how easily brutality can hide in plain sight. One of those victims was 34-year-old Wyatt Brennan. Wyatt made his living behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler, one of thousands of drivers moving freight from coast to coast. He had been on the road since he was 22, following the path his father had carved years before. The job was demanding, long hours, unpredictable weather, and endless nights alone. But Wyatt never complained. He actually loved the solitude. The road made sense to him. Out there with nothing but the rumble of the truck and the miles stretching ahead, he felt calm. Back home in Jackson, Tennessee, he had a wife, Karen, and 2 young daughters who were the center of his world. Every night, no matter what state he was crossing or how tired he felt, he called them before bed. He never missed a check-in. Wyatt wasn't just dependable. He was devoted. On June 23, 2011, he was running a delivery from Memphis to Nashville. As the sun dipped low, he pulled into a truck stop outside Jackson to refuel and grab something quick to eat. The station's security cameras captured him walking inside at 8:30 p.m., dressed in his usual flannel shirt and baseball cap. He bought a sandwich and a cup of coffee, chatted politely with the cashier, and headed back out to his truck. The footage showed him climbing into the cab, and moments later, the truck rolled onto Interstate 40. No one realized it would be the last time Wyatt was seen alive. When he didn't call home that night, Karen felt uneasy. Wyatt was a creature of habit. If he was running behind, he let her know. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe his battery had died. Maybe he'd hit traffic. Maybe he'd stopped to rest. But when dawn came and her phone still hadn't rung, her worry hardened into fear. She called his dispatcher. The company's tracking system showed something alarming. The signal from Wyatt's truck had stopped at 10:30 p.m. the night before. The last location was a rest area roughly 20 miles east of Jackson. Police were sent to investigate. What they found there would haunt everyone involved. Wyatt's truck sat alone at the far edge of the lot, parked away from the other rigs, half swallowed by the shadows. The driver's door hung open. Inside, Wyatt was slumped over the steering wheel. He had been shot twice in the chest at close range. Blood had soaked the seat and pooled on the floor. His wallet, phone, and the cash he carried were gone. But the freight in the trailer remained untouched. It looked like a robbery, but one carried out with chilling precision. Detectives began questioning anyone who'd been at the rest stop that night. But most of the travelers had been asleep in their vehicles. Only a few recalled anything that stood out. One driver mentioned hearing noises around 10:30, pops that sounded like fireworks, but he didn't think much of it. Another witness, a woman who had stopped to use the restroom, remembered seeing a man walking away from Wyatt's truck around that time. She said he looked to be in his 40s, heavy-set, wearing a dark jacket. She watched him climb into a white van and drive off, but she hadn't been close enough to note the plate number. When investigators reviewed the rest area's security footage, it proved nearly useless. The cameras were outdated, the lighting poor. A figure could be seen approaching Wyatt's truck, but the face was obscured. A white van was visible, but impossible to identify. As detectives dug deeper, the horror widened. Wyatt's death wasn't an isolated tragedy. Over the previous year and a half, 4 other truckers had been killed along Interstate 40. All had been shot. All had been robbed. All had been found at rest areas or truck stops. The similarities were undeniable. A serial killer was stalking the highway. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation took command of the growing case, pulling resources from departments across the state. A special task force was formed. The FBI joined in, offering analytical support and profiling expertise. The portrait they assembled of the killer was unsettling. He was likely a man in his 30s or 40s. He probably had experience in the trucking industry. Someone who understood the routines, vulnerabilities, and isolation of long-haul drivers. He was organized and deliberate, choosing victims who were alone and unlikely to be discovered quickly. He slipped in and out of the constant river of traffic, using the very nature of the highway to cover his crimes. Authorities increased surveillance at rest stops and sent warnings to drivers, urging them to stay in groups, park in well-lit areas, and avoid walking around alone. But the killer seemed to sense the increased attention. After Wyatt's murder, the attacks stopped for several months. Leads dried up. The task force grew frustrated as each potential clue led nowhere. Then, in February 2012, the silence shattered. Another driver, Michael Hastings, was found shot to death at a rest area near Nashville. Same method, same pattern, same vanished killer. Pressure mounted. Fear spread among truckers across the state. Finally, in April 2012, a break came from an unlikely source. A truck driver named Larry Dixon contacted investigators to report a suspicious encounter. He said he had been approached at a rest area by a man asking for help with his vehicle. The man acted friendly at first, but something in his manner felt wrong. Jittery, too interested in Larry's truck, eyes flicking constantly toward the cab. When Larry refused the request for help, the man's demeanor shifted. He became demanding, even aggressive, insisting he needed money. Larry, a former Marine, stood firm. The man eventually backed off and returned to his white van. Larry, sensing danger, managed to snap a photo of him before he drove away. The image was poor quality, but it was enough for the task force to run it through facial recognition software. The match that came back sent a shiver through investigators. The man was identified as Curtis Lee Harper, a 42-year-old with a long criminal history, including assault and armed robbery. He had previously worked as a truck driver but had lost his commercial license after a DUI. He fit the profile perfectly. Detectives tracked Harper to a rundown motel in Memphis. When they attempted to arrest him, he barricaded himself inside his room. After hours of tense negotiations, a SWAT team forced entry. Harper surrendered, but his cold, emotionless stare unsettled even the seasoned officers. Inside the motel room, police found a 9mm handgun, the same caliber used in all of the highway murders. Ballistics later proved it to be the weapon that killed Wyatt and the other victims. During questioning, Harper confessed with disturbing calmness. He admitted targeting truck drivers because they were isolated and often carried cash. He claimed he needed the money to fuel a drug habit, but investigators believed his motives went deeper. There was enjoyment in the way he described the killings, an unsettling satisfaction in the control and fear he inflicted. His trial moved swiftly. Harper was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. He remains on death row today. But the verdict could not fill the void left behind. Throughout the trial, Karen Brennan sat in the front row every single day. She never looked away from the man who had destroyed her family. When the guilty verdict was read, she wept. Not with relief, but with a grief so deep it seemed endless. Justice could punish Harper, but it could not restore the life she had lost. Her daughters grew up without the father who adored them. They learned who he was through stories, photographs, and the sound of his voice preserved in old home videos. But they would never feel his arms around them again. Never hear him laugh at their jokes. Never have him cheering from the sidelines at school events. Karen did everything she could to keep his memory alive. But the absence remained, a shadow that would never fully lift. The story of the Jackson Highway Killer left a permanent mark on Tennessee. Truck drivers became more cautious. Many began traveling in pairs or avoiding isolated rest stops altogether. Wyatt's fellow drivers still speak his name, honoring him by watching out for each other on the road. For everyone else, the case remains a grim reminder of how quickly life can unravel. Violence doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes, it slips quietly into the places we consider routine. Rest areas, parking lots, familiar stretches of highway. Wyatt Brennan was a good man, a dedicated father, a loyal husband, a worker who spent his life providing for the people he loved. His death was senseless, cruel, and undeserved. Yet his memory endures, proof of the fragility of life and of the fierce, lasting strength of love. In the quiet town of Paris, Tennessee, Life moves at an unhurried rhythm. It is the kind of place where families have lived for generations, where neighbors greet one another by name, and where whispers travel faster than truth ever could. Nestled in the northwest corner of the state, not far from the broad stretch of Kentucky Lake and bordered by acres of farmland and thick woods, Paris has always felt peaceful, safe even. But in the winter of 1983, that illusion shattered when a young woman's body surfaced in a place no one could have imagined. Eleanor Whitfield was 26 when she disappeared. She'd never lived anywhere but Paris, working long shifts as a waitress at a small diner on the town square. She was quietly beautiful, her auburn hair falling in soft waves down to her shoulders, and her hazel eyes holding a hint of sadness that few ever understood. People who knew Eleanor said she was gentle and reserved, polite to everyone but close to very few. She rented a small apartment above a bakery and kept mostly to herself outside of work. Rumors swirled around her. Talk of an affair with a married man. Talk of a pregnancy that ended abruptly. Talk of depression. But they were just that. Rumors. In a small town, stories grow wild when facts are scarce. And no one knew what Eleanor truly carried in her heart. On the night of December 14th, 1983, Eleanor ended her shift around 9 p.m. Her co-worker, Brenda Simmons, walked out with her into the cold evening air and watched her head toward her aging blue Ford Pinto. Brenda would later tell the police that Eleanor seemed distant that night, more withdrawn than her usual quiet self. When Brenda asked if something was wrong, Eleanor only murmured that she was tired. And Brenda didn't press her. After all, Eleanor was always tired. The hours were long, the tips small, and life rarely kind. But Eleanor never made it home. The next day, when she didn't clock in for her shift, her boss assumed she was sick. But when a second day passed with still no sign of her, concern turned into alarm. Brenda went to check Eleanor's apartment. She knocked repeatedly, but no answer came. The landlord opened the door with his spare key. The apartment was undisturbed, neat, orderly, untouched. Eleanor's purse sat on the kitchen table, her wallet still inside. Her keys hung neatly on a hook near the door. Nothing was missing. Nothing suggested a struggle, but Eleanor was nowhere to be found. Police filed a missing person report and began interviewing her co-workers and neighbors. They combed through her apartment again, searching for anything that might offer a clue. They found nothing. 2 days later, her car was discovered parked on a residential street half a mile from the diner. The doors were locked, no signs of forced entry. No blood, no footprints, no answers. It was as if Eleanor had simply stepped out of her life and vanished. Weeks crawled by. Police searched wooded areas, checked hospitals and morgues, and alerted nearby counties. But there were no sightings, no tips, no new leads. The trail had gone cold almost instantly. The people of Paris, Tennessee started to accept that Eleanor Whitfield might never be found. Then came February 3, 1984. That morning, a maintenance worker with the city's water department climbed the ladder of the East Side Water Tower after residents complained about discoloration in their tap water. The tower, an aging steel tank perched atop a concrete base and painted white with fading blue letters spelling Paris, stood nearly 80 feet tall. It supplied water to hundreds of homes in town. The worker opened the hatch at the top and reeled back in horror. There, drifting in the frigid water, bloated beyond easy recognition, was the body of a woman. He scrambled down the ladder and called the police. Within minutes, the area was swarmed with officers, firefighters, and emergency crews. Emptying the tower took hours, But eventually, the body was retrieved. Though decomposition was severe, investigators were able to confirm the identity. The woman in the water tower was Eleanor Whitfield. Her discovery left investigators with more questions than answers. How could Eleanor have ended up inside? The hatch was locked, and the lock showed no signs of tampering. The climb alone was dangerous. A rusted ladder, slick in winter cold. Hardly something one could navigate easily, let alone in the dark. Even if Eleanor had climbed up on her own, why go there? And if she hadn't gone willingly, who had put her inside, and how? The autopsy only deepened the mystery. The medical examiner could not determine the cause of death. There were no bullet wounds, no obvious stab marks, but the extent of soft tissue breakdown made it impossible to rule out other injuries. Toxicology tests showed no drugs or alcohol. The official cause of death remained unknown. The manner of death was marked as suspicious. Investigators began constructing a theory. They believed Eleanor had been killed before her body was placed in the tower. Someone must have had access to the lock, or the means to replace it. Records revealed that the city water department had changed the lock only a few weeks before Eleanor disappeared, meaning that whoever put her there would have needed a key or knowledge of the lock change. Detectives assembled a list of city employees with access to the tower: maintenance workers, supervisors, anyone who might have been near that tower at night. They interviewed each one, checking alibis and schedules. Nothing connected any of them to Eleanor. Another possibility emerged. Perhaps Eleanor had crossed paths with someone dangerous, someone she never mentioned to anyone. The old rumor about a married lover resurfaced. Police tried to identify him, but if Eleanor had been seeing someone secretly, she had left behind no letters, no phone records, no notes. No one could provide a name. During interviews, detectives learned something unsettling. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, several women in Paris had reported being followed by a man driving a dark pickup truck. He never approached them. He simply watched, from parking lots, from across the street, from behind the wheel of his truck. One woman, unnerved by his silent stare, managed to jot down part of the license plate. Police traced it to a drifter named Raymond Caldwell, who had been staying at a rundown motel outside town. Caldwell became a person of interest. When detectives questioned him, he admitted to following the women but insisted he meant no harm. He denied knowing Eleanor and claimed he had never set foot near the water tower. A search of his motel room revealed nothing suspicious. Without evidence, police couldn't hold him. Within days, Caldwell left Paris, and authorities lost track of him. And just like that, the case went cold. Eleanor's family buried her quietly in the local cemetery. Her headstone was simple, etched with her birth and death dates and the words, "Gone, but not forgotten." But as the years passed, her name faded from everyday conversation. New tragedies took the town's attention. Her file was boxed up and stored away. Another unresolved case gathering dust. In the early 2000s, a journalist researching unsolved Tennessee crimes stumbled upon Eleanor's case. Intrigued, he began digging. He interviewed old co-workers, longtime residents, and anyone still living who had known Eleanor. He reviewed police files and attempted to track down Raymond Caldwell. He discovered that Caldwell had died in 1997 during a bar fight in Missouri. Before his death, Caldwell had been arrested multiple times for assault. He had also been a suspect in the disappearance of a woman in Arkansas, another case that had never been solved. The journalist presented his findings to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, suggesting that Caldwell might have been responsible for Eleanor's death. But with Caldwell dead, and no physical evidence tying him to the crime, Nothing could be proven. The journalist's book briefly revived public interest in the case. A few tips came in, but none brought investigators any closer to the truth. The file remains officially open, but no active investigation continues today. Eleanor Whitfield's death remains unsolved. For the people of Paris, the story of Eleanor Whitfield lingers like a shadow over the town's history. It is a reminder that even the quietest places can harbor terrible secrets. The water tower where her body was found still stands, though it no longer pumps water. Some locals believe it's haunted, that Eleanor's spirit remains trapped there, tethered to the place where her life ended. Teenagers often dare each other to climb the ladder and peer inside, but few follow through. Eleanor's life ended quietly, in a way that suggests someone wanted her existence erased. Whether she fell victim to Raymond Caldwell or another unknown predator, whether her death stemmed from rage, fear, or random cruelty, we may never know. The truth sank with her into that cold, dark reservoir, and unless new evidence surfaces or someone finally speaks, the mystery of Eleanor Whitfield will remain unsolved. A ghost of the past echoing through the town of Paris. Reelfoot Lake rests in the far-flung northwest corner of Tennessee, an odd and mesmerizing sheet of water born from a series of cataclysmic earthquakes in the early 1800s. Those quakes, violent enough to make the Mississippi River surge backward, reshaped the land itself. Forest floors buckled, streams were swallowed, and a vast, shallow basin filled with water. Today, long-dead cypress trunks rise from the lake like ghostly pillars, their gnarled forms jutting skyward as if frozen mid-gesture. The place offers a kind of beauty that is both majestic and disquieting. Mist drifting between half-submerged trees, eerie silhouettes at dusk, and the ever-present hum of wildlife deep within the marshes and bogs. People visit Reelfoot to fish, to photograph birds, or simply to find quiet. Yet the lake carries a reputation for odd happenings. Strange lights, vanishing figures, echoes in the night that seem to come from nowhere at all. Locals speak of these things sparingly, often in hushed tones, as though acknowledging them too openly might invite them closer. When Andrew Caldwell arrived at the lake, he wasn't seeking mystery. He was 38 years old, a seasoned photographer from Nashville whose work focused on the rugged wilds of Tennessee. His landscapes had appeared in magazines, museum exhibits, and environmental projects. Reelfoot, with its eerie beauty, seemed like an ideal autumn retreat. He planned only to capture the annual migration of waterfowl, the great flocks that pass through before winter. He rented a simple lakefront cabin, one with creaky floorboards and a porch that faced the water. He arrived on a crisp October afternoon, a trunk full of camera equipment, and a mind eager for peace. The first several days slipped by gently. Mornings found him on a small rented boat drifting through pockets of fog, while egrets stalked the shallows and herons glided low across the lake. He filled memory card after memory card with images, geese bursting into flight, dew-coated reeds, reflections so still they looked like paintings. At night he huddled inside the cabin editing his photos, while the forest outside murmured with nocturnal life. Reelfoot was far from any major town, and Andrew cherished the quiet that wrapped around him each evening like a blanket. But, on the fourth night, Reelfoot revealed the secret it had been holding, and everything changed. Andrew had spent the late hours of daylight hiking along the shoreline, photographing the cypress trees as the sun dripped below the horizon and ignited their silhouettes in fiery orange. By the time he returned to his cabin, tired, hungry, ready to unwind, the night had settled thickly across the lake. He prepared a simple meal, poured a generous glass of whiskey, and stepped onto the porch to enjoy the cool October air. The sky was a scattered mosaic of stars. Owls called from distant trees. Small waves tapped rhythmically against the bank. It was peaceful. Until it wasn't. Out over the water he saw lights. His first instinct was to assume boats. Night fishermen using lanterns or floodlights. But these lights floated too high, hanging far above the lake's surface. There were 3 of them, perfect spheres, glowing with a pale, pulsing bluish-white radiance. They moved together in a triangular formation, sliding across the sky with a grace that didn't belong to any aircraft Andrew had ever seen. He stood motionless, the glass trembling in his hand. The lights drifted closer, crossing the lake with unnatural speed. They made no sound, not even the faintest hum. When they reached a position directly across from his cabin, about 100 yards away, they halted abruptly and intensified in brightness, casting elongated shadows of the cypress trees across the water like skeletal forms. Only when the lights stopped did Andrew's instincts kick in. He dashed inside, grabbed his camera with fumbling hands and burst back onto the porch. Through the lens, the lights looked even more otherworldly. Their edges shimmered. Their surfaces rippled subtly, as though made of living light rather than solid matter. They did not reflect anything. They emitted everything. He snapped as many photos as he could, his breath uneven and his heart pounding. The lights hovered there, radiant and silent, for several minutes. And then they moved. Without warning, they shot straight upward, ascending so rapidly the camera could hardly track them. Within seconds they were gone, swallowed by the night sky as if they had never been there. Andrew remained outside long after the lights disappeared, unable to calm the rush of adrenaline in his blood. When he finally went back inside, he reviewed the images again and again. They were unmistakable. 3 glowing spheres suspended over the lake. No blur, no trick of the eye, no room for misinterpretation. He had captured something extraordinary, but he had no idea what it was. The next morning, unable to shake the experience, he drove to the nearby town of Tiptonville. He spoke with store clerks, fishermen, gas station regulars, anyone who seemed willing to listen. Reactions varied. Some people smirked, dismissing the lights as swamp gas or reflections. Others gave knowing glances, the kind that suggested they had their own stories but weren't eager to share them with a stranger. An elderly man at a gas station offered more. He said the lights had been appearing for decades, possibly longer. He claimed Reelfoot was marked by powerful forces ever since the earthquakes, a place where natural and spiritual boundaries blurred. He mentioned whispers passed down from native communities who once lived there, tales of sacred waters that bridged worlds, of lights that guarded or warned. Later, at a small diner, a woman confided her own encounter. Years earlier, she and her husband had been fishing when similar lights appeared. They watched for nearly an hour as the orbs drifted and pulsed, until one by one they sank straight into the water without a sound or ripple. Her husband had tried reporting the incident, but no one believed him. She said they eventually stopped telling the story altogether to avoid mockery. Andrew spent the rest of his week waiting eagerly for the lights to return. Each night he set up his tripod, watching the sky until his eyes ached. But the lights stayed hidden. When he returned to Nashville, he shared the photos only with close friends. The reactions were mixed: curiosity, fear, skepticism. One friend, a physicist, examined the images carefully and admitted he couldn't identify a natural source that would create such lights. But he wouldn't venture further than that. Unsure what to do next, Andrew eventually posted the photos on a website devoted to mysterious sightings. The response came swiftly. Messages poured in from people claiming to have seen nearly identical lights across the country. Some insisted they were extraterrestrial craft conducting quiet surveillance. Others argued they were spiritual manifestations, ancestral presences tied to certain lands. A handful accused Andrew of faking the images, but he ignored them. He knew the truth of what he had seen. One comment struck him deeply. It came from someone claiming to be a member of the Chickasaw Nation, whose ancestors lived around Reelfoot before they were forced westward. The commenter explained that the lake had long been regarded as a sacred threshold, a place where the barrier between the physical and the unseen thinned. According to ancestral stories, the lights were known to appear in times of balance or disruption. Warnings, reminders, messengers. That message stayed with Andrew, stirring something in him. He began researching Reelfoot's history, everything from geological accounts of the Great Quakes to indigenous stories tied to the land. He found early settler journals that described floating lights, whispers rising from the lake, and eerie sensations that made the hair on the back of their necks stand up. In 2020, a documentary filmmaker reached out, intrigued by Andrew's experience. Together, they returned to Reelfoot Lake, spending 2 weeks interviewing locals, analyzing Andrew's photos, and conducting nightly vigils along the water. It wasn't until their final night that the lights returned. This time, 5 luminous spheres emerged above the treetops. They glided together in intricate, interwoven patterns, spiraling, drifting apart, reconnecting like a choreographed performance. The filmmaker captured the entire sequence on high-resolution video. When the footage was released online, it erupted across the internet. Millions watched. Debate raged. News outlets ran segments. Scientists offered explanations, though none seemed to fit perfectly. Some speculated about undiscovered species of bioluminescent organisms living in the lake's depths. Others suggested geologic forces may be generating electrical discharges. Many mentioned ball lightning, though even experts admitted the light's behavior didn't align with known patterns. To Andrew, all the theories seemed secondary. He no longer felt compelled to categorize what he had witnessed. The experience itself mattered more than the explanation. The lights had awakened something in him. An awareness that the world still held secrets, still possessed corners untouched by scientific certainty. He continued visiting Reelfoot every year. Over time, he became a quiet legend among locals, known as the photographer who had captured the unexplainable. People approached him with their own accounts, strange encounters, eerie sounds, unsettling dreams. He listened to all of them without judgment, understanding now that truth often lived in the spaces between experience and explanation. Andrew Caldwell's story, and the lights over Reelfoot Lake, serves as a reminder that Tennessee, for all its familiar landscapes, hides deep mysteries. From the ancient ridges of the east to the quake-carved waters of the west, the state is woven with stories that resist tidy conclusions. Some mysteries are dark and rooted in tragedy. Others, like the lights Andrew witnessed, invite wonder, asking us to question the limits of what we understand. For Andrew, the lights were not just an unexplained phenomenon. They were a turning point. They transformed doubt into curiosity, fear into reverence. No skeptic's comment could strip away what he saw with his own eyes. The lights had shown him a world far larger and stranger than he had ever imagined. And that revelation stayed with him forever. Lookout Mountain rises over Chattanooga like a towering guardian, its steep cliffs and sweeping vistas drawing crowds year-round. The mountain stretches along the Tennessee-Georgia line, a place known for both its natural wonder and its place in history. It was on these mist-draped heights that one of the Civil War's most dramatic clashes, the Battle Above the Clouds, unfolded. But the mountain's past holds more than old wartime memories. It conceals secrets that are far more recent and far more unsettling. In the summer of 2014, Two 24-year-olds, Natalie Burke and Joshua Patterson, were as close as any two friends could be. They'd met in middle school and had been bonded tightly ever since, moving through adolescence and early adulthood side by side. Natalie was studying nursing at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. Joshua had already started a career as a software developer with a local firm. Both were driven, intelligent, and admired by everyone who knew them. Their friends always described their relationship as strictly platonic, though many suspected deeper feelings that neither had ever voiced. Whatever the truth, their connection was undeniable. Nearly every weekend, the pair explored the forests, ridges, and rivers surrounding Chattanooga. Hiking was their shared escape. So, on Saturday, August 16, 2014, they planned another outing. This time on one of Lookout Mountain's lesser-known trails. They intended to reach a secluded overlook with a sweeping view of the Tennessee Valley, far from the crowds and noise of the main tourist paths. Before leaving, they posted cheerful photos online, both grinning with anticipation. Natalie wore a red tank top and black shorts. Joshua had on a gray tee and cargo pants. Their backpacks carried water, snacks, and basic supplies. Before heading out, they told Natalie's roommate they'd be home by early evening. But they didn't return. When Natalie still wasn't back by that night, her roommate called her repeatedly. Every call went straight to voicemail. She dialed Joshua's number next. Same result. By early Sunday morning, deeply alarmed, she contacted the Chattanooga Police Department. A missing persons report was filed, and search and rescue teams headed to Lookout Mountain immediately. Their car was found first, locked, unmoved, and showing no sign of tampering. Searchers pushed up the trail calling their names, scouring the woods for any trace of them. The route they had chosen wasn't easy, with steep rocky sections that required careful footing. But both Natalie and Joshua were experienced hikers. They knew what they were doing. Late Sunday afternoon, a search dog alerted near a section of trail where the forest dropped sharply down a tangled embankment. Handlers followed the scent into dense undergrowth. In a small clearing partially shielded by brush, they found what would become one of the most disturbing crime scenes Chattanooga had ever witnessed. Natalie and Joshua were lying next to each other, their bodies concealed beneath thick vegetation. Both had been stabbed repeatedly. The attack was frenzied, violent, and deeply personal. Blood had soaked into the soil, forming dark pools around them. Their backpacks were torn open, contents strewn around the clearing, yet nothing valuable seemed to be missing. Their phones remained in their pockets. Their wallets were untouched. The Hamilton County Sheriff's Office took over the investigation. Detectives immediately sensed this was no opportunistic attack. The brutality pointed to rage, from someone with a clear purpose. Natalie suffered at least 14 stab wounds, mostly to her chest and abdomen. Joshua had 9, along with numerous defensive wounds on his arms and hands, evidence he had fought desperately to defend them both. The medical examiner determined they died within minutes of the assault. The blood loss too severe for escape or a call for help. Investigators meticulously processed the scene. Samples of blood were collected. Footprints were photographed. The ground was combed for anything the killer might have dropped or left behind. A partial boot print was discovered near the bodies. Size 11. Likely belonging to a man. A cigarette butt was found several yards away and submitted for DNA testing. But a light rain the previous night had washed away much of the trace evidence, making the job painfully difficult. Detectives turned their focus to the victims' lives. They spoke with family, friends, co-workers, classmates, anyone who might know of a conflict, a threat, or a hidden tension. They reviewed text messages, emails, and social media accounts. What they found was nothing. No grudges, no stalkers, no jealous partners, no criminal ties. Natalie and Joshua were well-liked, responsible, and drama-free. There was no obvious motive for anyone to harm them. One of the earliest theories was that the pair had inadvertently stumbled onto something criminal deep in the woods. Though Lookout Mountain was known for its scenic beauty, secluded areas had long been rumored to host drug exchanges or other illicit activity. If Natalie and Joshua had encountered the wrong people at the wrong moment, they could have been silenced before they could report what they saw. Detectives partnered with narcotics officers and interviewed known offenders, but none of the leads produced anything substantial. Another theory emerged: the possibility of a serial predator targeting hikers. Over the years, sporadic attacks on hikers had been reported throughout the southeastern United States. None matched the pattern perfectly, but the FBI was still asked to consult. Their behavioral analysis unit built a profile of the possible killer. A physically capable man in his 20s or 30s, someone comfortable navigating rugged terrain, someone who likely lived in or near Chattanooga. The profile also pointed toward a person with a history of violence or domestic issues. A person who might not have been arrested, but who had exhibited aggression in the past. A killer who might have acted before. When the cigarette butt was processed, it yielded DNA. But when entered into national databases, it matched no one. Whoever had been at that scene had never had their DNA collected by law enforcement. The boot print was traced to a widely sold brand of hiking boot, far too common to narrow down. As weeks slipped into months, the investigation slowed. The community held vigils for the two young victims. Family members begged for anyone with knowledge to come forward. A reward fund grew to $50,000, yet not a single credible tip surfaced. Detectives, though discouraged, kept grinding through every minor lead. But the trail was fading. A glimmer of hope came in early 2015. A man named Derek Hollis was arrested for assaulting another hiker on a separate trail in the Chattanooga area. Hollis matched many aspects of the FBI profile. He also had a documented history of violence. Detectives immediately questioned him about the murders. His alibi for August 16th was thin. He claimed he'd been home alone, with no one to confirm it. Investigators seized his boots, discovering they matched the same brand and size as the print found near Natalie and Joshua. Unfortunately, the imprint from the scene was too degraded to conclusively prove it was his. Hollis was ordered to provide a DNA sample. He resisted at first, but a court mandate compelled him. His DNA was compared to the cigarette butt from the clearing. It wasn't a match. Hollis was ruled out. He served time for the assault, but had nothing to do with the murders. And once again, the case hit a dead end. Years passed. The murders of Natalie Burke and Joshua Patterson became one of Chattanooga's most infamous unsolved tragedies. Documentaries revisited the case. Online sleuths traded theories. Some suspected a transient who passed through the area and disappeared. Others believed the killer still lived in the region, blending into everyday life. A few speculated about cult activity or ritual killings, though there was no evidence to support such claims. Natalie's mother, Susan Burke, transformed her grief into activism. She dedicated herself to keeping her daughter's story alive, appearing on podcasts, attending conferences, and hosting memorial hikes every August in Natalie and Joshua's honor. She refused to let the case fade from public memory, and refused to relinquish hope that justice would one day be served. Joshua's father, Robert Patterson, grieved in quieter ways, choosing to honor his son by creating a scholarship fund supporting computer science students. helping others follow the path Joshua never had the chance to finish. The Hamilton County Sheriff's Office has never closed the case. Detectives continue checking the evidence periodically, hoping new forensic methods may uncover what older technology couldn't. In recent years, genetic genealogy has solved dozens of cold cases across the country. Investigators are exploring whether that same approach could finally lead to answers here. The DNA from the cigarette butt has been re-examined, with hopes that expanded genealogical databases might eventually reveal a familial match. For the families, the absence of answers is a wound that never closes. They live with the knowledge that their loved ones were brutally murdered, that the killer walked away, and that no one has ever been held responsible. The lack of closure is tormenting, a weight that never lifts. The story of Natalie and Joshua echoes far beyond Chattanooga. It speaks to the presence of darkness even in the most beautiful places, and to the reality that danger can hide where least expected. Yet it also reflects the strength of those left behind, the families who keep fighting, the detectives who continue searching, and the community that refuses to forget. Lookout Mountain remains a destination for hikers and sightseers. People still walk the paths where Natalie and Joshua spent their final hours. But for those who know what happened, the landscape carries a shadow, a silent reminder of the unsolved, the unexplained, and the unforgettable. And as long as the case remains open, as long as there are people determined to uncover the truth, there remains hope. Hope that the killer will one day be found. Hope that justice will finally be delivered. And hope that the families of Natalie Burke and Joshua Patterson will at last receive the closure they have waited for all these years.